My name is Louisa, and for 5 years, my world was confined to the four walls of a sprawling silent mansion, a gilded cage where I served as the unpaid, live-in caretaker for my husband's mother, Meredith Ashford. Before I dive into the story of how their greatest betrayal became my ultimate vindication, I'd love it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt underestimated or taken for granted, go ahead and hit that like button, because I have a feeling you'll understand exactly where I'm coming from. For all of you who are new here, make sure you subscribe to join our community of storytellers and survivors. The story I'm about to tell you involves two wills, a dusty box of so-called worthless trinkets, and a secret that my husband's family never saw coming. It's the story of how I went from being their glorified servant to the one person capable of dismantling their carefully constructed legacy, one act of genuine kindness at a time. It all began, as these things often do, with a family meeting that was presented as a discussion but was, in reality, a sentencing. I remember the oppressive gleam of the mahogany dining table in Meredith's home, a surface so polished it reflected our strained faces like a dark, unforgiving mirror. I was 34 at the time, married to Robert for 6 years, and I had my own life, my own career in library sciences, my own quiet ambitions. But Meredith, a woman whose formidable presence had always been the sun around which the entire Ashford clan orbited, had received a diagnosis. It was a cruel, degenerative illness that promised to steal her formidable mind and her fierce independence piece by painful piece. Robert's siblings, David and Claire, sat opposite us. David, the eldest, had the same predatory ambition as his father, a man who had turned the original family business into a soulless corporate behemoth. Claire, draped in designer fabrics that cost more than my monthly salary, cultivated an air of delicate sensitivity that masked a core of pure, unadulterated selfishness. And then there was my husband, Robert, handsome and charming and terminally conflict avoidant, positioned squarely between his siblings and me. "It's a difficult situation," David began, steepling his fingers. He always began meetings this way, as if he were chairing a hostile takeover. "Mother's needs are going to become extensive. We've looked into premier care facilities." Claire shuddered delicately. "Those places are so grim, David. So impersonal. Can you imagine Mother in a place like that? She'd hate it." What she meant was that the optics of shipping their matriarch off to a home would be terrible for the Ashford brand. "She needs to be in her own home," Robert chimed in, looking at me with an expression of profound sincerity. "She needs to be surrounded by family." It was then that I felt the trap beginning to close. The gazes of all three siblings swiveled to me, their smiles laden with a sickening, calculated sweetness. "Louisa," Claire said, her voice like honey laced with poison, "you have such a selfless heart. You've always been so wonderful with Mother." I had been wonderful with her on the handful of holidays I'd spent making polite conversation while she sized me up with her piercing blue eyes. "And you're not tied down with a demanding career like we are," David added, a casual dismissal of my entire professional life. "Robert tells us the library can easily find a replacement." Robert placed his hand on mine. It felt less like a gesture of support and more like an anchor. "We were thinking, darling," he said, his voice smooth and persuasive, "that you could move in here. Take care of her. It would mean the world to her and to us. You wouldn't have to worry about rent, about bills. You could just focus on being here for her." They painted it as a noble sacrifice, a sacred duty. They used words like love and family and selfless. But what I heard was something else entirely. I heard them outsourcing their responsibility. I heard them valuing my time, my life, my future at precisely zero. I looked at Robert, searching for an ally, for a flicker of understanding that he was asking me to extinguish my own life to ease theirs. I found none. He was already sold on the idea, proud of the perfect solution his family had devised. And in my foolish, desperate need to be truly accepted by this family, to prove my worth to a husband who always seemed to be measuring me against his family's impossible standards, I agreed. I let my dreams of curating historical archives wither on the vine and stepped into the gilded cage they had so graciously built for me. The first 2 years were a special kind of hell, a monotonous rotation of medications, bedpans, and the sterile smell of antiseptic that clung to everything. Meredith was not a grateful patient. She was a queen in exile, trapped within a failing body, and her frustration manifested as a sharp, relentless criticism of everything I did. The soup was too salty. The blanket was too heavy. My voice was too loud. She was, in those early days, every bit the formidable monster her children had painted her to be. I was utterly alone. The grand house, with its silent, dust-sheeted rooms and portraits of stern-faced Ashfords, became my prison. My days were measured in pills and fluid ounces, my nights punctuated by the sound of Meredith's frantic cries during her frequent, terrifying nightmares. The holidays were the worst. Robert and his siblings would descend upon the house in a flurry of expensive cars and loud, performative cheer. They'd sweep in, bearing gifts of cashmere blankets and imported perfumes for a woman who could no longer tell the difference. They'd spend a carefully timed 45 minutes at Meredith's bedside, snapping photos for their social media feeds. #FamilyFirst, Claire would caption a picture of her holding her mother's limp hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light. #MakingMemories. I remember one Christmas Eve with excruciating clarity. They had all arrived for their perfunctory visit. I had spent 2 days cooking a traditional feast, hoping, pathetically, to create a moment of genuine family warmth. They picked at the food, their conversation revolving around ski trips and stock portfolios. After their brief audience with Meredith, they gathered in the foyer, pulling on their designer coats. "You are just a saint, Louisa," David said, clapping me on the shoulder with condescending bonhomie. "Honestly, I don't know how you do it." "We are so grateful," Claire added, avoiding my eyes. "It gives us such peace of mind knowing Mother is in such capable hands." Robert kissed my cheek. "We're going to head out for a drink with some old friends," he said, already halfway out the door. "You don't mind, do you, darling? We won't be late." They left. They left me with a mountain of dirty dishes, a cold, half-eaten feast, and a confused, agitated old woman who had been asking for her son all evening. I stood in the silent dining room, the ghost of their expensive colognes hanging in the air, and I felt a cold, hard knot of resentment solidify in my chest. They praised my selfless heart while they carved it out of me, piece by piece, and served it up to suit their own convenience. I wasn't family. I was the help. The convenient, unpaid live-in help. The shift happened in the bleak midwinter of my 3rd year. A blizzard had blanketed the city, cutting us off from the world. Robert was on a business trip in a much warmer climate, and David and Claire were, as usual, unreachable. That night, Meredith developed a raging fever. She became delirious, her breathing shallow and ragged. I called for an ambulance, but they were overwhelmed, unable to guarantee a response time. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I called her doctor, who talked me through the emergency protocol over the phone. For hours, I was on my own, packing her with cold compresses, monitoring her vitals with a shaky hand, whispering reassurances to a woman who didn't even know I was there. Sometime before dawn, her fever broke. She fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. I collapsed into the armchair by her bed, utterly spent, my clothes soaked with sweat and spilled water. When I woke up, the morning sun was streaming through the window, and Meredith was awake. She was watching me, her blue eyes clear for the first time in days. The usual sharpness was gone, replaced by something I had never seen before: vulnerability. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Of course I'm here," I said, my own voice thick with exhaustion. I was worried. She was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on my face. "My children," she said finally, a statement, not a question. "They didn't come." "The storm," I offered weakly, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "No one could get through." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Nonsense. If $1 million deal depended on it, David would have arrived by helicopter. You stayed, Louisa." She reached out a trembling hand and, for the first time, patted my own. "You stayed." From that day on, something changed between us. The constant criticism softened into a gruff sort of guidance. The silence between us became comfortable, filled not with tension but with a shared understanding. She started asking about my life, my abandoned studies. One afternoon, I found a box of old, sepia-toned photographs in a forgotten corner of the attic. I brought them to her, and for the first time, she truly opened up. She told me stories of her own youth, of a fiery, ambitious girl who had dreamed of running her father's textile mill before society, and her husband had steered her toward a more appropriate life as a corporate wife. "This house," she said one evening, gesturing at the opulent room, "it's a monument to my husband's success. But the foundation of it all, the real beginning, was my father's company, Ashford and Sons Textiles." She spoke the name with a reverence I'd never heard from her before. It was small, but it was honest. It made things. It employed half the town. My husband and his partners thought it was quaint, old-fashioned. They built a sterile empire on its bones and let the original heart of it all just stop beating. She began to teach me things, in her own oblique way. She'd have me read her the business section of the newspaper and then grill me on it. "What would you do, Louisa? Would you buy or sell? And why?" She'd talk about her children's foundation, the Ashford Legacy Foundation, with a cynical curl of her lip. "It's a tax shelter with a publicist. They write a check, pose for a picture, and call it charity. They don't understand that legacy isn't about what you hoard. It's about what you build." I didn't realize it at the time, but she wasn't just sharing memories. She was educating me. She was forging a weapon and placing it, piece by piece, into my hands. She saw the hollowness in her own children and, in me, the quiet, overlooked caretaker. She saw something they had long since lost, a heart. And she was secretly, meticulously, planning to make that my greatest asset. The final 2 years of Meredith's life were a slow, painful fade. As her body weakened, her mind, in moments of startling lucidity, seemed to sharpen with a singular purpose. Her children's visits, always brief, became almost comically perfunctory. They would stand at the foot of her bed, discussing their stock portfolios and golf handicaps in voices just loud enough for her to hear, a casual cruelty that implied she was already gone. I would see the flicker of anger in her tired eyes, and I'd adjust her pillows, a small, silent act of solidarity. My protectiveness over her grew into a fierce, quiet shield. One crisp autumn morning, she grabbed my wrist with a surprising strength. "Louisa," she said, her voice a low, urgent command. "Cancel my physical therapy appointment for this afternoon. We are going out. Tell no one." "Meredith, where are we going? Are you feeling up to it?" I asked, concerned. "I am feeling precisely up to this," she insisted. "Call the car service. I have the address here." And Louisa, not a word to Robert. Or anyone. She handed me a slip of paper with an address in a part of the city I didn't recognize, a quiet street of old, respectable brownstones. The address belonged to a law firm, but it was nothing like the sleek, glass-and-chrome offices of the Ashford family's lawyer, Mr. Sterling. The brass plaque on the door read simply, "Arthur Vance, Attorney at Law." Inside, the office smelled of old books and lemon polish. The man who greeted us was as ancient and dignified as his surroundings, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He greeted Meredith not as a client, but as an old friend. "Meredith, my dear," he said, taking her hands in his. "It has been too long." "Arthur," she replied, a genuine warmth in her voice. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. This is my daughter-in-law, Louisa. I trust her completely." Arthur Vance nodded at me, his gaze both curious and kind. "Any friend of Meredith's is a friend of mine." In his quiet, book-lined office, Meredith seemed to gather a strength I hadn't seen in years. She was no longer a frail invalid. She was a matriarch, a commander. "Arthur," she began, "I need to make an addition to my affairs. A codicil. A private one." My heart began to pound. I had no idea what was happening, but the gravity in the room was immense. Arthur listened patiently as Meredith, with a clarity that was breathtaking, laid out her instructions. She spoke of the dormant company Ashford and Sons Textiles. She explained that its shares, while monetarily worthless on paper, constituted a controlling interest in the original family entity. She was leaving it all, the shares, the name, the forgotten properties, the patents, to me. I gasped. "Meredith, no. I can't. I don't know anything about business. This should go to your children." I was terrified. It felt wrong, like a betrayal of the family I had tried so desperately to join. Meredith turned her piercing gaze on me. It was not angry, but fiercely resolute. "My children have more than enough," she said, her voice steely. "They have money. They have power. What they don't have is a conscience. I am not giving you a business, Louisa. I am giving you a choice. A tool. I've watched you for 5 years. I watched you sacrifice your life, your ambitions, all for a family that sees you as a convenience. I saw you stay through the storm when my own blood couldn't be bothered. This isn't a reward. It's a restoration of justice." She looked at Arthur, then back at me. "I need 2 witnesses, and the law states they cannot be beneficiaries of this specific document. Arthur will be one. Louisa," she said, her voice softening slightly, "I need you to be the other." I was reeling. She was leaving me the company but making me witness a document that would enact it? Arthur gently clarified. "Meredith's primary will, the one her family is aware of, will be executed by their lawyer. It disposes of the main estate. This document, this codicil, is a separate, private instruction concerning a specific, non-liquid asset. You are not witnessing your own inheritance, Louisa. You are witnessing the legal transfer of a non-monetary asset, as requested by the owner. It is unorthodox, but it is perfectly legal. You are a witness to her sound mind and her signature." My head was spinning, but I looked at Meredith's determined face and I understood. This was her final move in a long and complicated chess game. She was setting the board for a game that would be played long after she was gone. My hand was trembling as I signed my name below hers on the heavy, cream-colored paper. I felt the weight of that signature settle into my very bones. The drive home was silent. I was a mess of conflicting emotions: gratitude, terror, confusion, and a strange, burgeoning sense of power. "Why, Meredith?" I finally whispered as we pulled into the long driveway. "Why me?" She looked out the window at the imposing facade of her home. "Because my father believed that a company should be a family, not a machine that grinds people up for profit. My children have become the machine. I'm hoping you can remember how to be the family." In the months that followed, her health declined rapidly. The moments of lucidity became rarer, but when they came, they were focused. One afternoon, she directed me to a small, locked rosewood box in her study. It was intricately carved but covered in a fine layer of dust. She pressed a small, ornate key into my palm. "This is for you," she said, her breath shallow. "The family knows of it. They think it's full of my mother's old costume jewelry. Sentimental trinkets." She gave a weak, conspiratorial smile. "Let them think that. Do not open it, Louisa. Not until they have shown you their true faces. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered, clutching the key. Her last days were quiet. I played the classical music she loved, read her poetry from her favorite books, and held her hand, its skin as thin as paper. The siblings were in and out, their conversations in the hallway now revolving around funeral arrangements and the logistics of selling the house. They spoke of their mother's impending death as an administrative task to be managed. Meredith passed away on a Tuesday morning, with the early sun casting long shadows across her room. She went peacefully with me by her side. I called Robert. He arrived 2 hours later, his grief loud and theatrical. David and Claire arrived soon after, their sadness real but mingled with an unmistakable air of relief. The long vigil was over. The estate could be settled. As I stood back and watched them orchestrate their mourning, I felt a profound and lonely sorrow, not just for the woman I had lost, but for the children she had lost long before. I clutched the cold, metal key in my pocket, the secret I now carried feeling heavier than the grief itself. The day of the will reading felt like a command performance. We gathered in the sterile, intimidatingly plush conference room of Sterling & Associates, the law firm that had managed the Ashford family's wealth for 2 generations. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and restrained anticipation. David, Claire, and my husband Robert were dressed in impeccable, somber black, looking for all the world like grieving children. They greeted me with the kind of strained, pitying politeness one reserves for a distant, unfortunate relative. "Louisa," Claire said, placing a cool hand on my arm. "Thank you for coming. I know how difficult this must be for you." Her eyes flickered with something that was not sympathy. "You were so good to her, right to the end," David added, his voice a low, respectable murmur. "We won't forget that. We'll make sure you're taken care of." The unspoken words hung in the air. Paid off, dismissed, sent on your way. I merely nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I sat in a chair set slightly apart from theirs, a silent confirmation of my status. I was not part of the inner circle. I was an employee whose contract had ended. Mr. Sterling, a man with a face as smooth and unreadable as a river stone, cleared his throat and began. He read from the will in a dry, emotionless monotone. It was exactly as they had all expected, a litany of assets that made my head spin. The portfolio of blue-chip stocks, worth millions, went to Robert. The sprawling real estate holdings, including a penthouse in the city and a vacation home in the tropics, went to Claire. The controlling interest in Ashford Consolidated, the modern corporate empire, went to David, solidifying his position as the family patriarch. They each accepted their inheritance with solemn nods, the picture of dignified sorrow, but I could see the glint of triumph in their eyes. They had won. The kingdom was theirs. Then, Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and turned to the final page. "And now," he said, his voice softening with a hint of condescension, "for Louisa." All three siblings turned to look at me, their faces arranged in masks of pity. Robert gave me a weak, apologetic smile. "To my daughter-in-law Louisa," Mr. Sterling read, "in gratitude for her dedicated and tireless service during my final years, I leave the small rosewood box that was kept in my study, along with all its contents. It is my hope that these sentimental items from my own mother will bring her some small comfort in her time of grief." Silence. And then, the unmistakable sound of a suppressed snort from David. He quickly disguised it as a cough, but the damage was done. Claire's lips tightened into a pitying smirk. She reached over and patted my hand as if I were a child who had just been given a consolation prize at a party. "Oh, Louisa," she breathed. "How thoughtful of her. Mother always did love her little keepsakes." The humiliation was a physical force, a hot wave that washed over me, leaving my skin prickling and my ears ringing. 5 years of my life. 5 years of bedpans and midnight terrors, of loneliness and sacrifice. 5 years of putting their needs, their mother, their family, before my own. And this was my reward. A dusty box of trinkets and the smug, pitying smirks of the people I had served. I looked at my husband, my Robert, praying for him to say something, to defend me, to wipe the condescending looks off his siblings' faces. He just sat there, looking profoundly uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. In his silence, I heard my final verdict. He had made his choice. He was an Ashford. I was just the help. Meredith's voice echoed in my mind, as clear as if she were sitting beside me. "Wait until they have shown you their true faces." They had. Oh, they had. A strange calm settled over me. The burning shame cooled into a blade of ice-cold clarity. I stood up. My movements were slow, deliberate. I walked to the gleaming mahogany table where the dusty rosewood box sat, looking small and pathetic in the opulent room. I picked it up. "Well," David said, standing and straightening his tie, "the business of grief now concluded. That's all settled then." "Louisa," Claire said, her voice dripping with false concern, "if you find you need a little something to tide you over, to get back on your feet, I'm sure we could arrange for a small stipend. A severance of sorts." That was it. The final, unbearable insult. I paused at the door, the box held tightly in my hands. I turned back to face them, and for the first time, I let them see the smile that was blooming on my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was something sharper, something they had never seen from me before. "That won't be necessary, Claire," I said, my voice even and clear. "But thank you so much for your concern. You've all been incredibly revealing." The smile, and the word revealing, threw them. Confusion flickered across their faces. The pity was replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Before they could recalibrate, before they could formulate a response, I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving them alone with their millions and their sudden, unsettling sense of unease. I didn't go back to the house. I didn't go to a friend's. I walked 10 blocks, The rosewood box clutched to my chest like a shield and went directly to the quiet brownstone office of Arthur Vance. He was waiting for me, a pot of tea already steeping on a silver tray. He looked at my face and gave me a sad, knowing smile. "They showed you, didn't they?" he asked gently. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Then let's see what Meredith showed you," he said, clearing a space on his large, cluttered desk. I placed the box on the desk. My hands were shaking as I took the small, ornate key from my pocket and fitted it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I lifted the lid. On top lay a pile of what did, indeed, look like worthless trinkets. A string of faux pearls, a tarnished silver locket, a few brooches with missing stones. I could almost hear Claire's pitying sigh, but I knew there was more. My fingers found the edge of the worn velvet lining and lifted. Underneath was a false bottom, and nestled within the hidden compartment lay two items, a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax, and the legal document I had witnessed months before. The private codicil. I handed the will to Arthur. He broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded a handwritten letter. He began to read Meredith's final words to me aloud, his voice steady and kind. "My dearest Louisa," it began, "if you are reading this, then my children have behaved precisely as I expected they would. They have shown you that in their world, value is measured only in dollars and prestige. They have insulted your sacrifice and dismissed your worth. I am sorry for the pain they have caused you today and for the past 5 years. But I am not sorry for the opportunity this moment presents." Arthur paused and looked at me over his spectacles. She was a remarkable woman. He then picked up the codicil. "And now, for the legal standing. I, Meredith Ashford, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath 100% of the shares, titles, and assets of the holding company known as Ashford & Sons Textiles, including all property and intellectual patents held therein, to my daughter-in-law Louisa. This transfer is absolute and final." It was real. It was all real. The dusty company, the old mill, the forgotten patents. It was all mine. I was no longer the poor, pitiable caretaker with a box of junk. I was the controlling shareholder of the original Ashford family legacy. Arthur let me have a moment to absorb it all, then he read the final lines of Meredith's letter. "They will try to crush you, or buy you, or dismiss you. Do not let them. Do not sink to their level and seek mere revenge, Louisa. That is their game, not yours. Instead, build something better. Build something that lasts. Build something that will remind them, every single day, of the meaning of the word legacy. Shame them with your goodness. It is the only weapon they will never see coming." Sitting there in that quiet, sunlit office, the scent of old books in the air, I finally understood. Meredith hadn't just left me a company. She had left me a mission. And the pitying smirks of her children were not the end of my story. They were the fuel for its true beginning. The weeks that followed the will reading were a whirlwind of focused, purposeful action. The grief for Meredith was a constant deep ache, but it was now overlaid with a new, thrumming energy. Arthur Vance became my guide, my mentor, my rock. He was a semi-retired widower with a sharp legal mind and a deep, abiding loyalty to Meredith's memory. He seemed to take a quiet, fierce delight in helping me execute her final, brilliant maneuver. Our first task was to take stock of my inheritance. Ashford & Sons Textiles was, on the surface, a ghost. It had no employees, no income, and its assets had been written off the main corporation's books decades ago. But as Arthur and I dug deeper, we began to uncover its hidden power. The company owned the deed to the original textile mill, a sprawling brick building on the industrial side of town. It was dilapidated and forgotten, but it was structurally sound and sat on a surprisingly valuable piece of land. More importantly, it held the patents. Meredith's father had been an inventor, a man ahead of his time. He had developed and patented a series of weaving techniques for creating incredibly durable, long-lasting fabrics from natural, sustainable fibers. In an era of fast fashion and disposable goods, these patents were a goldmine. They were the blueprint for building something with integrity. I spent my days in archives and my nights poring over old company ledgers, feeling more alive than I had in years. The librarian in me reveled in the research, in piecing together the history of a company that was built on craftsmanship and community. This wasn't a soulless corporation. It had a story. It had a heart. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated in my very soul, what I had to do. I'm not going to restart it as a for-profit business, I announced to Arthur one afternoon over stacks of dusty blueprints. That's what they would do. That's what they understand. I'm going to do what Meredith wanted. I'm going to build something better. Arthur looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. What do you have in mind, Louisa? I'm going to restructure it as a nonprofit, I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke. We'll call it the Meredith Project. We will use her father's patents to create high-quality, sustainable textiles, blankets, clothing, linens. We will hire people who are traditionally overlooked, women re-entering the workforce, older individuals who have been aged out of their careers, people from disadvantaged backgrounds. And all the profits, every single cent, will be channeled directly into creating and funding high-quality, compassionate, community-based elder care programs. The kind of programs the Ashford Legacy Foundation pretends to support. Arthur was silent for a moment, and then he let out a low chuckle. Oh, Meredith, he said, looking up at the ceiling as if she were listening. You magnificent woman. You picked the right one. While I was quietly laying the foundations of my new life, the Ashford siblings were loudly celebrating theirs. They were a fixture in the society pages, photographed at galas and charity balls. The Ashford Legacy Foundation was their new favorite toy. They hosted an obscenely lavish launch party, which was covered in a glossy magazine spread. The article featured a photo of David, Claire, and Robert handing a giant, novelty-sized check to a generic national charity, their faces beaming with self-congratulation. I read that the foundation's primary mission was to support initiatives for the elderly, and the bitter irony made me laugh out loud. Their support was a single, tax-deductible donation. The rest of their foundation's considerable budget was allocated to administrative overhead and promotional expenses, which was Ashford speak for paying their staff and throwing more parties. They hadn't given me another thought. I was a solved problem, a piece of old furniture that had been cleared out of the house. The divorce papers were the first shot I fired. I had them drawn up by Arthur and served to Robert at his downtown office. His reaction was one of pure, baffled indignation. He called me that evening, his voice a cocktail of anger and patronizing disbelief. A divorce, Louisa? Seriously, he sputtered. After everything my family has done for you? After we gave you a home for 5 years? You didn't give me a home, Robert, I said, my voice cold and steady. You gave me a job. And you never paid me. Consider this my final invoice. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then he shifted tactics. I heard a rumor, he said, his tone changing to one of amusement. Something about you playing around with that old mill property. That's cute, Lou, really. But don't get in over your head. It's a tough world out there. If you need some real money, to get yourself set up in a little apartment somewhere, I can talk to David and Claire. We can help you out. The condescension was so profound, so ingrained. It was almost breathtaking. He still saw me as the helpless little mouse, incapable of surviving without their magnanimous scraps. He had no idea he was talking to a woman who now controlled the very soul of his family's history. That's very generous of you, Robert, I said, savoring the moment. But I think I'll be just fine on my own. You should really pay more attention to your family's legacy. You never know what you might be missing. I hung up the phone before he could reply, a real, genuine smile on my face. The game was afoot. 6 months. It took 6 months of relentless work, of navigating bureaucracy, of managing contractors, of convincing skeptical suppliers to take a chance on a nonprofit with no track record. Arthur handled the legal labyrinth, while I handled everything else. I poured every ounce of my energy, every bit of the anger and hurt and determination, into the project. We restored a section of the old mill, not to its former glory, but to a new, brighter purpose. The cavernous weaving room, once silent, was now filled with the hum of refurbished looms and the light streaming in through newly glazed windows. We hired our first team of 10 employees, a mix of older women with forgotten skills, young mothers needing flexible hours, and one retired textile engineer who looked at Meredith's father's patents with tears in his eyes. The launch of the Meredith Project was not a gala. There was no champagne, no red carpet, no society photographers. We held it on a sunny Saturday afternoon on the grounds of the mill. We invited the local community, the neighborhood families, the staff of the nearby senior centers. We served lemonade and cookies baked by our new employees. It was simple, it was real, and it was beautiful. And, of course, I sent one very special invitation. On thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind Meredith would have used, I mailed an invitation to the board of directors, the Ashford Legacy Foundation. I sent it to their gleaming corporate headquarters, a little seed of chaos planted in their sterile world. I knew their curiosity, their arrogance, would be too great to ignore. They would have to see what the little caretaker was playing at. They arrived halfway through the event, pulling up in David's black luxury sedan, which looked absurdly out of place parked next to the beat-up station wagons of the community members. David, Claire, and Robert stepped out, dressed for a board meeting, their faces a mixture of bemusement and disdain. They surveyed the crowd, the simple decorations, the old mill, and I saw them exchange a look. How pathetic. They spotted me near the makeshift podium. I was wearing a simple dress and an apron, a smudge of flour on my cheek. I was talking to a group of elderly women from the local community center, laughing at a story one of them was telling. When I saw the Ashfords approaching, I excused myself and walked to meet them, my heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm. "Louisa," David said, his eyes sweeping over the scene with a critical air. "What is all this?" "It's our launch party," I said brightly. "I'm so glad you could make it." "The Meredith Project?" Claire read the name off the banner hanging over the mill entrance, a look of distaste on her face. "How quaint. Using Mother's name for your little hobby." Robert, looking deeply uncomfortable, just shifted his weight. "Lou, what are you doing with this old place?" "I thought it was condemned." "It wasn't condemned," I replied calmly. "Just forgotten. Much like the values it was built on." I stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. The quiet chatter of the crowd died down. I looked out at the faces of my new employees, my community partners, the families. And then my eyes landed on the three Ashfords, standing there like stone statues of entitlement. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear and strong. "Many of you knew this building when it was Ashford & Sons Textiles, the heart of this community. It was a place built on the idea that a business had a responsibility to its people." A woman I admired very much, the woman for whom this project is named, believed that legacy isn't about what you inherit in a will. It's about what you build for the future. I watched their faces as I spoke. The initial amusement was fading, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. "That's why we've revived this place not as a corporation, but as a community," I continued. "Here at the Meredith Project, we will create beautiful, sustainable goods. We will provide meaningful employment. And we will dedicate 100% of our profits to providing real, tangible, on-the-ground support for the elderly in our community. We will fund in-home assistance, social programs, and wellness checks, ensuring that our elders are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." I paused, letting the words sink in. I looked directly at David, then Claire, then Robert. Their faces were pale. The blood had drained from them, replaced by a toxic cocktail of fury and disbelief. They finally understood. This wasn't a hobby. This was a direct, public indictment of their entire existence. My small, heartfelt project was holding up a mirror to their hollow foundation, and the reflection was hideous. A reporter from the local paper, a young woman I had spoken to earlier, was scribbling furiously in her notepad, her eyes wide. "I dedicate this project," I concluded, my voice thick with emotion, "to Meredith Ashford. She taught me that the greatest value lies not in a stock portfolio, but in a selfless heart. A lesson I will carry with me always." The crowd erupted in warm, genuine applause. As they clapped, the three Ashfords stood frozen, utterly exposed. Their carefully constructed image of philanthropic benefactors had just been shattered by the quiet, unassuming woman they had dismissed with a box of trinkets. Their smirks were gone, replaced by the slack-jawed shock of people who have just realized the game is over, and they have irrevocably lost. The fallout was immediate and, for them, catastrophic. The local newspaper ran a front-page story the next day. The headline was a work of art, heart of the community. Heiress revives grandmother's true legacy, shames family's corporate charity. The article beautifully contrasted the authentic, community-driven mission of the Meredith Project with the glossy, superficial PR of the Ashford Legacy Foundation. It quoted me, it quoted the joyful employees, it quoted the director of the senior center who was already partnering with us. It painted the Ashfords as what they were, cold, out-of-touch plutocrats. My phone began ringing off the hook. First came the angry, sputtering call from David, threatening lawsuits. Arthur calmly informed him that I was the legal and sole owner of Ashford & Sons Textiles, and any legal challenge would result in a public discovery process that would be deeply embarrassing for him and his siblings. That was the last I heard of lawsuits. Then came the tearful, manipulative call from Claire, accusing me of tarnishing their mother's memory. Mother would be horrified by this public spectacle, Louisa, she cried. No, Claire, I said, my voice devoid of the sympathy she was trying to extract. Mother would be horrified that you needed a public spectacle to remind you what her memory is actually worth. Robert's attempt was the most pathetic. He showed up at the mill a week later, holding a bouquet of gas station flowers. He tried to appeal to our shared history, to the life we'd had. He said he'd made a mistake, that he was under pressure from his family. He asked if we could try again. It was the classic, desperate plea of a man who only recognizes a woman's value after she has demonstrated it to the rest of the world. The woman you were married to doesn't exist anymore, Robert, I told him, not unkindly. You and your family saw to that. And the woman who stands here now? She's not interested. I shut the door on his shocked face, and with it, the final chapter of my old life. A year passed. The divorce was finalized. The Meredith Project wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. The durability and quality of our textiles gained a cult following. We secured grants and partnership deals with ethical retailers. We expanded our workforce and, most importantly, we were fully funding 3 different elder care programs in the community. I was no longer a caretaker. I was a CEO, a creator, a community leader. I worked harder than I ever had in my life, and I went home every night with a sense of purpose that was more fulfilling than any bank account. I found my worth not in a lawyer's office, but in the hum of the looms, in the grateful smiles of the seniors we helped, and in the pride on the faces of my employees. Meredith had given me so much more than a company. She had seen a strength in me that I didn't know I possessed, and she had orchestrated the perfect, brutal circumstances to force me to find it. The dusty box of trinkets was never an insult. It was a test. It was a key, not just to a hidden will, but to a hidden version of myself. The greatest inheritance she left me was the knowledge that my value was never up for their negotiation. And that's my story. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who believe in you the least can end up giving you the greatest motivation of all. They can force you to stand up and define your own worth on your own terms. Family isn't always about the blood you share. It's about the people who see you, who value you, and who stand by you in the storm. I would love to hear from you all now. Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who should have known it all along? Share your story in the comments below, because every story shared makes us all feel a little less alone. Please don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of survival and vindication. Thank you so much for joining me today and for listening to my journey. I wish you all the strength to build your own legacy, whatever that may be.